She agreed to marry him once. Then he left without a word. 3 years on, he walks back through her door with an inheritance deadline and a second proposal. She has conditions, 5 of them. This is the 5th term. A Regency romance audiobook. Let the story begin. Chapter 1. The Proposition. London, April 1815. Constance Fairfax was 24, the eldest daughter of Sir Edmund Fairfax, and lived in a house on Wimpole Street in London. Her mother's death 8 years ago had made her, by necessity, its mistress. She was considered handsome, with ash-blonde hair and dark blue eyes, and a quietness about her that people sometimes mistook for coldness until she chose to let them see otherwise. She was also considered capable, which she preferred to be known for over her looks, and sensible, which she had earned. That she was a little too composed for her own good was, she felt, nobody's business but hers. 3 years ago, Philip Thornton had asked for her hand, thought better of it, and left for the continent without the courtesy of an explanation. She had rebuilt. She had been very sensible about it, and yet the door on those daydreams had never been fully shut, though she had never ventured so far as to choose what she might say if he were to suddenly appear. This is not to say that she thought about this obsessively. She was not the sort of woman who brooded. But on quiet evenings when the fire burned low and her younger sister Charlotte had finally stopped talking, Constance had occasionally, just occasionally, constructed versions of this scene. What she would say, how she would look, whether she would be standing or seated. The problem with imagining something on a regular basis is that it becomes, in the end, a kind of armour. She had rehearsed it so thoroughly that the thought of him on her doorstep had become almost a plan, rather than a hope. She had decided, in the abstract, what she would and would not permit herself to feel. She had mapped every weakness and shored up every one. She had not, she was about to discover, been truly prepared for the moment when the imagining became the thing itself. The butler's announcement reached her in the drawing-room where she sat writing letters.
The Viscount Thornton, Miss Fairfax.
For a moment she simply stared at the page before her. Then she set down her pen with the careful deliberateness of a woman who is very much in control of her hands, which was more than could be said for her heart, which had done something inconvenient that she had absolutely no intention of acknowledging.
"Thank you, Mason. Show him in."
Her sister Charlotte, who had been arranging dried flowers on the mantelpiece with more devotion than talent, spun round so quickly she knocked a sprig of lavender to the floor.
"Constance, he is actually here!"
"Sit down, Charlotte."
"The nerve of him!"
"Charlotte."
Charlotte sat with the expression of someone who has been told to sit but intends to compensate by sitting very loudly, and positioned herself at an angle that afforded a direct sight-line to the door. Philip Thornton, Viscount Thornton, came in as if he had not spent 3 years on the continent, avoiding everyone who might reasonably resent him. He was, Constance noted, still infuriatingly well-looking. She had rather hoped 3 years of Italian sunshine and French wine might have done something unfortunate to him. They had not. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps it was simply that she had spent 3 years not looking at him, and now she was, and there was a great deal to observe. Dark hair, good coat, the same easy bearing, except that it was not quite the same. There was something different underneath it now, something that had not been there at 24, a quality she could not immediately name. He looked like a man who had been somewhere and learnt something and was not entirely comfortable with what the learning had cost him. His jaw was set in a way that suggested he had rehearsed whatever he was about to say several times and was not entirely confident in his material. He crossed the room, bowed over her hand. She had risen, naturally, because she was a well-bred woman who did not allow men who had humiliated her to see her rattled, and said,
"Miss Fairfax, you look very well."
He turned briefly toward the corner.
"Miss Charlotte."
Charlotte, who had clearly been deciding whether to acknowledge him at all, gave him a look of considerable neutrality and said,
"Lord Thornton?"
Constance sat back down and gestured to the chair across from her.
Lord Thornton, do sit. Charlotte, would you please fetch my blue shawl from upstairs?
Charlotte went for the shawl with the martyred air of a woman who wants very badly to stay and hear everything and is being denied the opportunity on the flimsiest of pretexts. She did not, however, plan to stay away long.
I imagine,
Philip said, settling into the chair with the ease of a man who is trying very hard to appear comfortable.
that you are wondering what brings me here.
I confess the thought had occurred to me.
You seem quite composed.
Should I not be?
He looked at her steadily.
Most women would have thrown something by now.
I am not most women,
She folded her hands in her lap.
and I have used up my supply of dramatic gestures. 3 years is a long time. I find I am rather past the throwing stage.
A pause.
Do get on with it, Philip. You didn't come to my drawing room to compliment my composure.
The use of his given name, she noted, caused something to move in his expression. She filed it away. He leaned forward, rested his forearms on his knees, and looked directly at her.
My uncle died in January. You may have heard. He was Viscount Thornton before me, and held the Thornton estate in Wiltshire. I am now the new holder of the title.
I had not heard. My condolences.
Thank you. The estate is in good order. The title succession is not complicated.
He drew a breath.
The will, however, is.
Constance waited.
My uncle had opinions about a great many things. The running of an estate, the responsibilities of the peerage, the importance of the continuation of the family line.
The ghost of a wry expression crossed his face.
He expressed these opinions in the form of a legal document, specifically a condition attached to my inheritance. I must wed before the 1st of August, or the estate passes in its entirety to my cousin Gerald.
A silence followed.
Gerald, who once wagered his horse, his coat, and very nearly his life on a single hand of cards?
And, following a particularly ambitious evening at his club, fell into the Serpentine attempting to demonstrate that a man could walk on water. Yes, that is the same Gerald.
Charlotte appeared in the doorway at precisely this moment, shawl in hand, and made a small sound that she converted imperfectly into a cough.
I see. And I imagine you have come to me for a reason.
Because I owe you.
He said it simply without decoration.
Because I wronged you, and I know it. And I have no defense that would satisfy either of us. Because what I did 3 years ago was cowardly and selfish, and I left you to manage the consequences alone. And I've thought about that every day since. And because there is no other woman in London to whom I would want to make an offer.
Constance studied him for a long, careful moment. He was sincere. That was the thing she had not prepared for. Not the offer, not even the apology, but the quality of his attention as he made it. Philip Thornton had always been charming. Charm was his natural weather, effortless and warm. But this was not charm. He was not performing ease. He was sitting in her father's drawing room with his forearms on his knees and his jaw set, looking at her as though her answer mattered considerably more than his pride.
Is this an offer of marriage?
It is, on whatever terms you choose to name.
Charlotte had gone quite still in the doorway, which was, in its way, more expressive than anything she might have said. She rose and crossed to the window, then turned and looked at Philip Thornton with the level gaze of a woman who has rebuilt herself from the rubble of what he left behind and found the result considerably sturdier than the original.
Come back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You will have my answer then.
He stood. He did not look relieved exactly. He looked, she thought, like a man who understood he was being given more hope than he had earned.
Tomorrow morning.
Something in his expression shifted.
I am aware I have no right to ask for more than that.
He bowed and left. Charlotte stepped aside to let him pass, and the door had barely closed before she turned on Constance with an energy that suggested she had been physically restrained for the past 12 minutes. Constance took a deep breath to steady herself. Philip still wanted to marry her. In her daydreams, she said yes immediately, swept up in feelings for him that had never quite faded. There was also a version where she said no and showed him the door. She had rehearsed them both.
Constance,
Charlotte said.
Sit down, Charlotte.
you're going to say yes.
I'm going to have some tea and go to bed.
You're absolutely going to say yes.
Charlotte seized her hand.
What will your terms be? Can I help decide? I have thoughts. I have many thoughts.
Constance looked at her sister. 18, curly-haired and bright-eyed, with the kind of open, expressive face that announced every thought before she had a chance to consider whether to share it, and so thoroughly in Constance's corner that impartial advice had never once been on offer, and permitted herself a small, private smile.
Go to bed, Charlotte. I need to think.
But
Alone.
Charlotte went. She would think very loudly about this from the other side of the wall, and they both knew it. But she left, and Constance was alone. She sat for a while without moving. The fire had burned low. The letters she had been writing when the butler announced him were still on the desk, half finished. One of them was to Mrs. Dunmore, the thread of it lost entirely. His words came back to her, unbidden.
Because there is no other woman in London to whom I would want to make this offer.
She turned his words over carefully, the way she turned everything over, looking for the cracks, the places where the logic did not hold. She had made herself good at that. 3 years ago she had believed in him without question, and she knew precisely what it had cost her. Now the truth sat bare and cold before her. He needed a wife. She was a respectable match, nothing more. She picked up her pen. She set it down. She crossed to the window and looked out at the street, which was quiet now, the lamplighter long gone and the square settled into the particular stillness of late evening in London, when the day's business is done and the night's entertainments have not yet returned their participants to their beds. She had asked him to return tomorrow because she needed the night to think. This was true. It was not the only truth. The other truth was that Philip Thornton had left her without the courtesy of an explanation, and he could stand on her doorstep for one more morning and wonder what her answer would be. She was not certain. That was the honest account of it. She had spent 3 years telling herself she was certain she was better without him, certain she knew what her answer would be if he ever returned, certain that the woman who had once waited for him was a woman she had taken considerable pains to stop being. All of that had seemed settled. And then he had walked back into her life, because she was, it seemed, the path of least resistance, the most sensible solution when his situation required a wife. Said I wronged you with that infuriatingly steady voice, and expected her world to rearrange itself accordingly. The aggravating thing was that it might. That night, alone by the dying fire, she found herself thinking not of yes or no, but of the conditions under which she might say yes. Chapter 2. The Terms. She had written the terms at 2 in the morning when she had finally accepted that sleep was not coming and had lit her candle and sat at the small desk in her room with a fresh sheet of paper and her pen already inked, as though some part of her had known she would come. She had expected to sit for an hour staring at a blank page. She did not. The terms came out of her already formed, as though they had been composed and were simply waiting to be put down upon the page. There were 5. She wrote them out, read them back, and changed not a single word, surprising herself with her preparedness and clarity. The 5th term she had looked at longest.
I reserve the right to end this arrangement at any time, for any reason. Should I invoke this right, you will accept it without objection. The account given to society will be yours to bear, and you will settle upon me the sum of £10,000 within 30 days, with no conditions attached.
3 years ago, he had walked away without explanation and without leaving her any recourse, forcing her to face the fallout and public speculation alone. She had had no equivalent power. She had simply had to endure it. The 5th term could not prevent him from leaving again, but it gave her something she had not had before: the right to end the arrangement first, on her own terms, whenever she chose. And unlike his departure 3 years ago, her withdrawal would carry consequences he could not ignore. She dressed carefully in the early morning hour. The gown was deep blue, not the pale, fashionable blue of a debutante, but the darker, steadier shade of a woman who had decided what she was about. Long sleeves, a high neck, the silhouette clean and uncluttered, the only ornament a narrow trim of darker velvet at the cuffs. She had considered a dove-grey gown and had set it aside. Too subdued. The sprigged muslin. Too hopeful. The blue was right. Nothing about it could be read as either hoping or defeated. She found her father already at breakfast, which was not unusual. Sir Edmund Fairfax was an early riser by disposition, and he looked up from his newspaper with the mild, unhurried expression of a man who expected nothing more disruptive than the post.
Good morning, Papa. I have something to tell you.
He set down the newspaper. She told him plainly. Philip's return, the inheritance condition, the proposal, her decision to hear him out this morning. He was expected at 9 o'clock. She laid it out in the same order she had written the terms. Clear, sequential, nothing omitted. He was quiet for a moment when she finished.
Philip Thornton.
Yes.
Another silence. Sir Edmund Fairfax was not a man who expressed anger loudly. He expressed it the way he expressed most things, with precision and considerable restraint, which made it, in its way, more formidable than shouting.
He left you without a word,
He did.
and now he requires a wife before August, and he has come to you.
He looked at her steadily.
Constance, you understand what I am going to ask?
Whether I am certain.
She met his eyes.
I have written 5 terms, Papa. He will agree to all of them, or the conversation ends this morning. I am not walking into this without protection.
He looked at her for a long moment. The look she knew, the one that contained both pride and something that was not quite grief, but lived in the same neighbourhood.
Show me the terms.
She passed him the notebook. He read them in silence. When he reached the 5th, something in his expression shifted.
Good. I will want a copy of these for my solicitor. The formal settlement will need to be drawn up properly.
Of course, Papa.
I will be in my study. Send him to me before he leaves.
She was in the drawing room by 8 o'clock, the notebook on the table beside her, the tea things arranged, the chair across from her positioned at exactly the right angle. Charlotte knocked at 8:45 to ask what was happening, and was told, pleasantly but firmly, that nothing was happening yet and she should go and have breakfast. He was 3 minutes early. Constance observed him arrive through the front window as his carriage drew up, watched him check his watch and stand on the pavement in the thin spring sunshine for exactly those 3 minutes before ascending her steps. It would be untruthful to say that she did not take some small satisfaction in the nervous expression upon his face. Mason showed him in. Philip looked at the open notebook, and something shifted in his expression.
What are the notes for?
She gestured to the chair.
Sit. There is tea. This will not take long.
He sat. He did not touch the tea she poured for him. He watched her with the focused attention of a man waiting to hear a verdict. Constance opened the notebook.
I have 5 terms. They are not negotiable. If you cannot agree to all 5, we end the conversation here, with no ill feelings on either side.
Understood.
Fast?
She did not look up.
You will court me. Properly. Publicly. For the full season. Rides in the park, dances at balls, flowers delivered correctly and not at excessive intervals. There is a window between absent and suffocating, and I expect you to find it.
She glanced up briefly.
Society remembers what you did.
When this season ends, they will see a woman who was chosen, not a woman who was settled for. I will not spend the rest of my life as a footnote to your inconvenience.
Philip said nothing. He nodded once. She noted that he did not try to interrupt or to offer any commentary. He simply listened. It was not, she told herself, unexpected, but it was noted.
Second, you will not pursue or be seen to favour any other woman. I will not be courted in public and overlooked in private.
That seems reasonable.
They are all reasonable terms. That is rather the point.
A pause. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile.
Yes, of course.
Third,
She paused here, briefly.
Neither of us will mistake the performance for the reality. If that changes, it will be acknowledged honestly, not assumed.
There was a pause that lasted slightly longer than the others. She watched him and found his gaze had gone to the window. She found herself wondering what he hoped for, whether the terms were, to him, a beginning, or merely the means to an end.
Agreed.
He said finally.
Fourth, if your intentions change at any point during this arrangement, you will tell me so directly and without delay. I will not again be left to deduce your mind from your absence.
He winced. Just slightly.
You have my word.
She held his gaze for a moment longer than she intended, then returned to the notebook.
Fifth, I reserve the right to end this arrangement at any time, for any reason. Should I invoke this right, you will accept it without objection. The account given to society will be yours to bear, and you will settle upon me the sum of £10,000 within 30 days, with no conditions attached.
She closed the notebook and looked directly into his eyes. Silence stretched between them. Philip looked at the closed notebook, then at Constance, and she watched him understand exactly what she was offering, and why. The escape route, the acknowledgement that she did not entirely trust him yet. He met her gaze directly.
I agree to all 5 terms.
No conditions? No exceptions?
No exceptions.
He looked at her steadily.
They are fair.
yes, they are.
It was the sincerity in the way he had said it. It was, she thought, the most dangerous thing about him, not the charm, not the easy manner, not even the fact that he was still infuriatingly well-looking. It was that she believed him. She believed him against her better judgment and a considerable body of contrary evidence, and she had no entirely satisfactory explanation for why. Constance stood, and he rose with her.
Then we have an arrangement.
She held out her hand. Not to be kissed. She offered it for a handshake. His eyes met hers with something unreadable in them, and he shook it. His hand was warm. She had not expected that, and she resented the observation.
Lady Hartley's assembly is on Thursday. I will send word that we will attend together. I trust you are acquainted with her?
I am.
I am partial to freesias, if you should think of flowers, or white tulips. Not roses. They say rather too much.
He was quiet for a moment.
White tulips. I remember.
She had not expected that. She said nothing and returned her attention to the notebook. He gave her a short bow, then paused at the door.
I should like to speak to your father if he is at home.
He is in his study and expecting you.
Something shifted in Philip's expression. Surprise, she thought, and then something quieter.
Of course. Thank you.
He left. Constance sat back down, poured herself fresh tea, and spent some time looking out the window at the street below, where his carriage was drawn up, waiting. She thought about the very specific, carefully constructed, absolutely sensible terms she had drafted. She considered them now, from the other side of the conversation. They were good terms. They protected her reputation, her independence, her right to withdraw, and, if it came to that, her financial security. A woman might recover from one broken engagement, given time and sufficient composure. 2 was another matter entirely. The 5th term saw to it that should this arrangement fail, it would not fail her along with it. Now that they were agreed, She waited for the satisfaction of a thing well managed. It came accompanied, unexpectedly, by another realization. Philip Thornton had noticed her, 3 years ago, in a way she was not often noticed. She had 5 terms and 3 years of sense between them, and she was going to need all of it. She would not let her heart overrule her head. She sipped her tea and told herself firmly that she was not hopeful. She was practical. There was a considerable difference, and she intended to maintain it. Charlotte arrived in her dressing gown 8 minutes later.
Well?
She demanded.
We have come to an arrangement.
Charlotte stared at her.
You are going to marry him.
Possibly, if the season goes as it should.
Constance,
She pressed both hands to her mouth.
how was he?
Agreeable.
That is not what I meant.
It is what I am prepared to say. Go and dress. I shall need your opinion on a ball gown for Thursday.
Charlotte went, still visibly composing thoughts she had been forbidden to say aloud, and Constance turned back to her tea. There were plans to be made, and she was good at plans. She had 2 days to determine precisely how this was to appear in public. The right degree of warmth, the right degree of ease. Nothing that looked like eagerness, and nothing that looked like reluctance. She had been managing her own manner in company since she was 17. This was simply a new application of that skill. She found herself curious about what had passed in her father's study. Sir Edmund would have mentioned the solicitor, the formal settlement, the terms properly drawn up. Philip had come expecting a simple answer. He had received instead a rather more structured morning than anticipated. She opened the notebook to a fresh page and began to write. There was something settling about it, the scratch of the pen, the orderly progression of tasks, the way a plan laid out in ink became a thing she could manage rather than a thing that was happening to her. She had learnt this early, that the antidote to feeling too much was to do something precise. Her handwriting was, she noted, extremely steady. She was proud of that. What she did not let herself think about, not yet, was the white tulips. Chapter 3. Opening Moves. The ball gown Charlotte had selected for her, after an exhaustive process that had occupied the better part of an afternoon, was the deep green silk, which Constance had initially vetoed on the grounds that it was too conspicuous. Charlotte had countered that conspicuous was rather the point, and Constance, who had spent an hour examining the alternatives and finding each of them wrong in a different way, had been forced to concede. The green it was. She had looked at herself in the mirror when she was ready, and felt, with a composure she was proud of, absolutely nothing in particular, which was, she told herself, precisely the correct response. She did not think even once about what Philip would think of her dress. They arrived with Mrs. Dunmore, as they generally did. She was an old friend of their mother, and had been chaperoning them to various events for years. Philip Thornton was already at Lady Hartley's assembly when they arrived. Constance noted this with the detached interest of a general observing terrain before committing her forces. He was standing near the far window with Lord Aldwick, and he looked up when they entered, not immediately, which would have been obvious, but after a moment's delay that suggested either admirable self-control or very good peripheral vision. Their eyes met briefly. He inclined his head. She returned the nod with precisely the degree of warmth that could be read as civil, and nothing further.
He's looking at you.
Charlotte breathed beside her.
People generally look at others in a room this size. Come, Lady Hartley will wish to receive us.
Lady Hartley was a small, sharp-eyed woman who had been presiding over London assemblies for 30 years and could read a social development from 50 paces. She received them with considerable warmth. The warmth of a woman who had known exactly what she was hosting when she extended the invitation, and remarked that Lord Thornton had already arrived. and that Constance was looking extremely well this evening. Constance thanked her and moved on before any further observations could be made. She managed the first few moments with considerable precision. She spoke to Mrs. Ashworth and her daughter, exchanged pleasantries with Sir William Brooke, declined 2 offers of refreshment, accepted 1, and kept her company to a sufficient variety that no one could reasonably say she had come to Lady Hartley's assembly for any particular purpose. Charlotte circulated beside her, doing the same with surprising competence for someone who had been instructed firmly in the carriage to look interested but not invested. It did not take long for Philip to approach. He crossed the room directly toward them at an unhurried pace, in full view of everyone present, which was, Constance reflected, precisely what the first term required. He was to court her, openly, with the kind of intentional, visible attention that society would notice and remember. She had written those words herself. She had simply not anticipated what it would feel like to watch him carry them out.
Miss Fairfax.
He bowed. Then to Charlotte,
Miss Charlotte.
and to Mrs. Dunmore, with the courtesy due to a chaperone.
Mrs. Dunmore, good evening.
Constance inclined her head.
Lord Thornton,
You are looking very well this evening.
You are kind to say so.
He glanced briefly around the room, then back to Constance.
I am glad you are all here.
They spoke for several minutes. Nothing that would attract undue attention, nothing that suggested an engagement. Everything suggested a man making a genuine effort to be agreeable to a woman he was interested in. Philip asked after her father, observed that the string quartet was very fine, and disagreed with her, mildly and clearly, on the question of whether the new quadrille steps were an improvement on the old ones. He did not back down when she held her ground. She appreciated that. She also noted that he had grown considerably more difficult to disagree with since she had last known him, which was inconvenient. When he asked her to waltz, she accepted. The timing was correct, visible enough to be noted, and early enough that it left room for a second dance before the evening ended, which would make his interest in her clear to the room. She was aware, as they took the floor, of being watched. This was not unusual. She was often watched at assemblies, but the nature of the watching had changed. It had the particular quality of people reconsidering a prior conclusion. For the past 3 years, they had placed her in the category of a jilted lady, a moniker she had done a great deal to lose. Now they were revising their notes, and she could feel it across the room like a change in weather. Philip was an excellent dancer. She had known this. She had not, apparently, known it well enough.
You are very composed.
He said, as they moved through the figures.
I am generally considered to be.
It was not a criticism.
I did not take it as one.
He looked at her sharply, then pulled her a fraction closer.
How are you finding the evening?
Precisely as I expected.
And what had you expected?
People watching, people wondering, Lady Hartley looking pleased with herself. All present and accounted for.
The corner of his mouth moved.
You are not wrong.
I rarely am about society. I have been contributing immensely to their amusement for the past 3 years.
That landed. He was silent for a moment. Then he said,
Your sister appears to be enjoying herself.
Constance glanced toward Charlotte, who was deep in conversation with Mrs. Dunmore, gesturing with considerable enthusiasm about something.
She is, although this is one dance she must sit out. My father has forbidden her to waltz until she is 20, or married, whichever comes first.
A sensible precaution.
Charlotte does not think so.
He smiled then, a proper smile, not the controlled half-expressions she had been noting all evening, and Constance looked away before she could register it too precisely. The second dance came an hour later. By then, the room had formed its assessment. Lord Thornton was paying marked attention to Miss Fairfax, and Miss Fairfax was permitting it. The whispers were not unkind. They had, Constance observed, the particular quality of a story being revised, before her eyes, into something more satisfying than its first telling. Philip brought her a second glass of champagne between the dances and did not use the occasion to say anything significant. He asked whether she thought the weather would hold for the week, and she said she doubted it, and he agreed with her. And it was the most ordinary conversation she had had all evening and somehow the most comfortable. She was not unaware of the irony. It was during the interval that Mrs. Dunmore drew her aside. Eleanor Dunmore was 63 years old, had attended more London assemblies than almost anyone currently living, and possessed a memory for social detail that would have been alarming in less sympathetic hands. She had been present at the beginning of Constance's acquaintance with Philip Thornton 3 years ago, had watched that particular affair unfold from its promising beginning to its abrupt, unexplained end. She appeared now at Constance's elbow with a glass of lemonade, and the expression of a woman who intended to say something useful regardless of whether it was welcome.
"You are looking well, my dear. The green suits you."
Thank you, Mrs. Dunmore.
"He has been attentive this evening."
He has been courting me.
Constance said pleasantly.
That was rather the intention.
Mrs. Dunmore studied her with the careful attention of a woman who had watched enough second chances to know what they could cost.
"I was here 3 years ago, Constance. I watched how that ended."
As did I.
"He looks at you like a man who has realised what he had."
Or like a man who requires a wife before August.
Constance instantly regretted the bitter note in her voice.
"I had heard something of the late Viscount's testament."
She handed her the lemonade.
"I simply suggest that you be careful which of the two you choose to believe. A woman who protects herself too thoroughly closes off everything she actually wants. A woman who does not protect herself sufficiently—"
She paused.
"I have seen both endings, my dear. Neither is entirely without cost."
Constance thanked her for the lemonade and the counsel, in that order, and returned her attention to the room. She was not certain what she thought of Mrs. Dunmore's observation, and was, in fact, deliberately not thinking about it, which was itself a form of thinking about it, and she knew it. They made their farewells at 11:30. Philip escorted them to their carriage and handed Charlotte and Mrs. Dunmore in first. Then he turned to Constance. His eyes met hers briefly.
You managed well this evening,
She said quietly.
You had set the terms.
He said simply.
I followed them, and they worked.
A pause.
Good evening, Constance.
As he handed her in, he gave her hand a gentle squeeze. The carriage door closed. And although she could not know, he stood watching until they were out of sight. Charlotte had arranged herself on the seat across from her with the expression of someone exercising heroic restraint. It lasted approximately 4 minutes.
That went extremely well.
It went adequately.
He danced with you twice, and I was not permitted to waltz with Mr. Pemberton even once, which I consider a grave injustice.
You know Papa's terms.
I know. 20 or married. It is a very long time to wait.
Her sulking expression suddenly turned very sly.
And he brought you champagne and spoke with you for at least 40 minutes altogether. I was counting.
Charlotte,
I am merely noting what occurred.
Please note it silently.
Mrs. Dunmore said nothing, but the corner of her mouth moved. Charlotte subsided. The elaborate silence that followed was occupied, Constance suspected, by an extensive private commentary operating just below the surface. They arrived home. Constance spoke briefly with Mason about the Morning Post, and after her maid had helped her into her nightgown and been dismissed, sat at her dressing table and looked at herself in the mirror for longer than the occasion strictly required. Mrs. Dunmore's words settled somewhere she had not intended to put them. She picked up her brush and began to address her hair with the methodical focus she applied to everything. He had listened to her. Not with the practiced half-attention of a man at an assembly waiting for his turn to speak, but genuinely attending. He had remembered that she preferred tulips to roses. He had winced when she had read out the 4th term. She was certain of it now, which she considered a sign of a guilty conscience and a point in his favour. He had attributed the success of the evening to her terms. She had not expected that, and was now attempting to set it aside. The thought, when it arrived, came without ceremony. She was not entirely sure his attentiveness was only performance. She put down the brush, she picked it up again and gave her long hair 100 vigorous strokes and went to bed, having decided firmly that she would think about it in the morning when she would be considerably better equipped to be sensible about it. Her inability to fall asleep and the memory of the feeling of him pulling her closer during the waltz were entirely not connected. She was certain of that. Chapter 4. Mr. Caldwell. It was at dinner one evening that Sir Edmund first mentioned Mr. Thomas Caldwell, a friend, he said, whom he had been meaning to invite for some months, and who would finally be coming next week.
An excellent fellow,
Sir Edmund had said, which for him was the highest commendation possible.
sound mind, good work. You will like him.
Constance had received this with rather more scepticism than she usually applied to her father's remarks.
You are not, I hope, attempting to introduce me to someone.
I am inviting a friend to dinner.
Sir Edmund said, in the tone of a man who had anticipated this objection and prepared accordingly.
Caldwell and I have been meaning to arrange it for months. It has nothing whatsoever to do with you.
I am currently being courted by Lord Thornton.
I am aware of that.
A brief pause.
Caldwell is simply a friend.
She looked at him.
You will like him.
He added, which rather undermined his position. Thomas Caldwell, as it happened, proved to be an exception to her scepticism. He was perhaps 32, with the kind of face that became more interesting as the evening progressed, not immediately striking, but attentive, with a quality of stillness that she had learned to value in people who thought before they spoke. He was a barrister, practised in the Chancery Courts, and had known Sir Edmund for some years through a shared interest in legal reform that had kept them in occasional correspondence. He was also the kind of man who held his opinions without needing the room to ratify them, which she found considerably more interesting than the sort who abandoned their principles the moment someone disagreed. He had, by the end of the soup course, offered the opinion that a good hostess ought to attend first to her most distinguished guests, and Constance, who held the opposite view entirely, said so. He did not back down immediately. They discussed it through the fish course, arrived at a partial resolution by the time the main course was cleared, and had settled into a comfortable disagreement by the time the pudding appeared. At which point Charlotte, who had been following the exchange with barely concealed impatience, finally ventured an opinion of her own. It was, as Constance might have expected, a good one.
Your sister is formidable.
Mr. Caldwell said quietly, when Charlotte had turned to address Sir Edmund.
She is.
Constance agreed.
Don't tell her I said so.
As are you.
She looked at him. He smiled. A direct, uncomplicated smile that required nothing in return, and she found that she did not quite know what to do with that, which was an experience she could not immediately categorize. Sir Edmund looked pleased throughout the evening in the way he did when several things he approved of were occurring simultaneously. He and Mr. Caldwell had talked for an hour after the ladies had withdrawn. She could hear the low, steady rhythm of it from the drawing-room, and when the gentleman joined them again, his expression had settled into something that could only be described as satisfaction.
Excellent man.
He said again when Mr. Caldwell had taken his leave.
I told you so.
You did. Good night, Papa.
She went upstairs and permitted herself, briefly, to imagine how things might have unfolded had she met Mr. Caldwell a year earlier. The thought of informing Lord Thornton that she was, regrettably, unable to accept his offer of marriage, as she was already spoken for, gave her a satisfaction she was not entirely proud of, and that the third term, that neither of them would mistake the performance for the reality, remained, she told herself, entirely intact. Mr. Caldwell called on Tuesday, without prior indication that he intended to do so. Constance received him in the drawing-room, Charlotte present, as was correct, and within the first 5 minutes of conversation understood, with a composure she was working rather hard to maintain, that her father had not mentioned Lord Thornton to him. Not the courtship, not the arrangement, not any of it. Mr. Caldwell was conversing with the easy warmth of a man entirely unaware that the situation had complications, and she was responding with the careful attention of a woman who had just realized that her father had a very great deal to answer for. She could not say so herself, of course. She could only receive him graciously and trust without much conviction that the situation would resolve itself tidily. Then the butler announced Lord Thornton. There was a brief pause of the kind that contains several things at once. Philip came in with his usual composed attention and took in the room in approximately the time required to cross the threshold. His expression did not change. Something in his eyes did, briefly. But he had recovered himself before Constance had finished rising to greet him.
Lord Thornton.
She performed the introduction with perfect equanimity.
May I present Mr. Thomas Caldwell, an acquaintance of my father's. Mr. Caldwell, Lord Thornton.
The two men bowed with precisely the degree of courtesy the situation required. Philip sat. Mr. Caldwell settled back with the ease of a man who had noticed nothing of consequence. The conversation resumed, the way conversations do when everyone in the room has decided to behave very well. It was, Constance reflected later, a masterclass in civilized behaviour. Philip asked Mr. Caldwell something about the Chancery Courts. Mr. Caldwell answered with his usual thoughtful brevity. Charlotte offered biscuits. The weather was discussed. Nobody said anything that was not entirely appropriate, and the tea was very good, and it was all perfectly fine. Philip's expression, however, was doing something she had not seen before. She could not have named it precisely. It was not ill-mannered. She would have noticed ill-mannered. It was more a quality of attention, a particular careful stillness that settled over him whenever Mr. Caldwell addressed her directly, which he did with the natural ease of a man who had already established a comfortable acquaintance over one dinner and saw no reason to conceal the fact. Philip was watching them with the focused calm of a man who had formed a view about something, found the view uncomfortable, and had not yet settled on what to do about it. She noted it with the composure she applied to everything she did not wish to think about. Charlotte, to her considerable credit, confined her own observations to a single glance in Constance's direction that lasted approximately 1 second and said everything. Constance met it with a look of her own. Charlotte's mouth curved very slightly and they left it there. Philip stayed 40 minutes, correct and pleasant throughout. Philip rose to take his leave before Mr. Caldwell did, which was correct. Constance saw him to the door. There he turned to Constance.
I wonder if you might find time for a walk in St. James's Park on Thursday. The weather is expected to be fine.
I should like that.
I will call at 2.
He bowed.
Good afternoon, Miss Fairfax.
She returned to the drawing room, where Mr. Caldwell had risen politely, and Charlotte was wearing the expression of someone who had formed a comprehensive series of opinions and was choosing her moment with great care. Constance sat down and poured more tea.
Mr. Caldwell,
She said pleasantly.
you were telling me about the Thornley case.
Charlotte made a small sound that could have been anything. Constance did not look at her. Thursday was fine, as predicted. Philip arrived at 2 with the punctuality she had come to expect. Charlotte was already in her bonnet, Mr. Pemberton having been recruited, through some arrangement Constance did not inquire into too closely, to make a 4th. This rendered the whole enterprise entirely proper, which Constance appreciated, and also gave Charlotte someone to talk to at considerable length about the ducks, which she appreciated considerably more. St. James's Park was well populated at that hour. They were seen, which was the point, and they were also observed to be enjoying themselves, which was not entirely performance. Philip walked beside her with the ease of a man who was glad to be there, and did not particularly mind if it showed. If Constance seemed particularly content, she told herself she was simply keeping in step with him. Charlotte and Mr. Pemberton drew ahead by some unspoken agreement within 10 minutes. Their conversation carried back to Constance in enthusiastic fragments. Something about the relative merits of various breeds of ducks, a subject on which Charlotte appeared to hold developed opinions, and then faded entirely as the path curved ahead. Philip and Constance were, in the most correct and appropriate sense, alone. She was not thinking about the drawing room on Tuesday. She was not thinking about the particular way Philip had watched Mr. Caldwell make a point, leaning forward, gesturing slightly, entirely unself-conscious, or about the expression on Philip's face during that moment, which she had noted and set aside and was most certainly not revisiting. She was thinking about the path ahead, and the weather, which was indeed very fine.
Your father mentioned that Mr. Caldwell called again yesterday.
Constance looked at Philip briefly.
Did he?
He speaks very well of him.
A pause.
As do you.
He is a good man.
Philip said nothing for a moment. They passed a woman with a very small dog and a very large hat. She did not look at him.
I know.
It was the tone of it, quiet and simply honest, that made her look at him.
He can offer you things I cannot.
He was looking ahead toward the water.
A straightforward history, no conditions, no deadline. No previous occasion on which he failed you.
Constance considered this.
That is a more comprehensive list than I would have compiled myself.
It is an accurate one.
You are being very honest.
I find that I have some difficulty being otherwise with you. I cannot say precisely when that changed.
She looked away, toward the grass at the edge of the path. The park was bright around them, and full of people who were not paying attention to them.
I have not encouraged Mr. Caldwell.
I know. That is not what I was intending. I should say I was not suggesting you ought not to. He is a good man. If you found him...
He stopped.
I have not.
She said, surprising herself that she meant it. The silence that followed was a different kind from the ones they had been navigating all week. Charlotte's voice carried back to them on the breeze, the ducks again, evidently, and Mr. Pemberton appeared to be in enthusiastic agreement with whatever she had said. He nodded. They walked on. She put it somewhere careful to be looked at later when she was alone, and there was no particular reason left to be composed about anything. Charlotte rejoined them at the gate, flushed and pleased, Mr. Pemberton at her side. She glanced between them once, said nothing, and smiled, which told Constance that she would be busy answering many questions later, when they were alone. Mr. Pemberton took his leave at the gate. They walked back through the afternoon streets, Charlotte falling into cheerful conversation with Philip about something Constance half attended to, and arrived home a little before 5. Philip paused at the door.
Thursday was well spent.
It was.
He bowed, and the door closed, leaving her to Charlotte's questions.
This will require some biscuits,
said Constance. Charlotte smiled and went to ring the bell. Later that evening, Constance could not help but wonder if Philip was more concerned with losing her affection or his money. That was something she had not considered when she drew up her terms. Chapter 5. The Drive. Arabella Weston arrived on Monday morning with the energy of someone who had been in London for less than a week and had already heard a great deal. She embraced Constance with the warmth of a dear friend who had been away on her honeymoon and was not inclined to waste time on reserve, deposited herself on the settee and looked at Constance with the expression of a person who had much to say and was deciding where to begin.
Welcome home, Mrs. Weston,
Constance said, with the bright smile she reserved for people she was genuinely pleased to see.
You look very well.
I am extremely well,
Arabella said.
as is Frederick, who sends his regards. I find that married life is very much to my taste.
She paused.
I have heard about Lord Thornton.
Constance had expected this. Arabella had always been efficient.
I expect you have.
She said pleasantly.
The whole of London has heard about Lord Thornton.
Arabella studied her with the attentive gaze that had made her a person one was careful around in the nicest possible sense.
Constance, please tell me everything. How did this come to be?
She said it with kindness rather than accusation, which was characteristic of her. After she had heard it all and been shown the terms, each one in Constance's careful hand, Arabella took her hands in both of hers.
You know I will support you in any course you choose. I want nothing more than to see you as happy as I am. But I will not pretend, for your sake or mine, that I am not frightened for you.
I appreciate your concern,
Constance said, in a tone that gave nothing away. Arabella looked at her for a long moment.
Are you certain about this, Constance?
Not at all. However, I am going to tell you that the situation is in hand, that I am quite well, and that I would very much like to hear about your honeymoon.
You shall hear about Scotland and Mr. Weston at great length, and I will enjoy telling you about the mountains, which were spectacular, and the weather, which was not, and Frederick standing on a hillside in the rain, looking enormously pleased with himself, while I sat in the carriage and reconsidered several of my life choices. I have since reconsidered them back. He is very charming when he comes in from the cold.
She leaned forward slightly.
But first, Constance. How has he been? Has he given you any cause to consider invoking the 5th term?
He is courting me. Visibly. Attentively. He has been everything the situation requires.
Arabella was quiet for a moment. She had the quality, rare in someone as warm as she was, of understanding when a sentence was doing more work than it appeared to be.
Everything the situation requires,
she repeated.
Yes.
And is that enough?
It was the right question, delivered with the gentleness of someone who already suspected the answer was more complicated than whatever Constance was about to say. Constance met her gaze with the composure she brought to everything she did not wish to examine in company.
It is early in the season.
Arabella accepted this without pushing further, which was one of the things Constance had always valued about her. She moved, with characteristic grace, to the mountains of Scotland and the very fine Edinburgh assemblies, and Constance sat and listened and was glad of the warmth of it. But Arabella's question remained, hovering just at the edge of her attention where she could not quite set it aside. Was it enough? She wished she knew the answer to that. The Wetherington dinner was on Wednesday, and Constance had been thinking about it for a week. Not with anxiety, precisely. Anxiety was an unproductive emotion, and she did not permit it on principle. What she did allow herself was a thorough assessment. Who would be present, what risks existed, and what could mitigate them. There was a distinction between this and anxiety, and she had maintained it with complete conviction for 6 days, and moderate conviction on the 7th, which was becoming somewhat academic by Tuesday morning when she caught herself revising Philip's briefing materials for the 3rd time. Lady Ramsdale would be at the Wetherington table. She had confirmed this through 2 separate social channels, which meant it was reliable. Lord Fallow would be there as well, and Sir Dennis Carroll, and approximately 12 other people whose opinions of Philip ranged from cautiously neutral to specifically interested in whether the most speculated courtship of the season would hold. It was, in short, the most important dinner of the arrangement to date, and Constance had decided that Philip must be briefed, and that a planned carriage ride was the correct venue for it. The day of the outing arrived, with rain. Not the polite, apologetic drizzle of an English morning that clears by 10, as Philip had confidently predicted, but a determined, wholehearted downpour that set in at 9 and showed no signs of reconsidering.
We could postpone,
Philip said, standing in the entrance hall with an umbrella he had not really expected to use.
We are not postponing,
Constance said.
We will take the covered carriage. The park will be empty, which is admittedly the wrong audience, but the drive is long enough for what I require.
What do you require?
To discuss the Wetherington dinner next Wednesday. There are people you need to be prepared for, and things you should not say.
She leaned closer and lowered her voice.
And I would rather cover this without Charlotte or my father's input.
Noted.
He handed her into the carriage without ceremony and climbed in after her. Mrs. Dunmore was already settled in the corner, sporting an appropriately blank expression, as befitting the face of a chaperone. Philip looked at her for a moment.
I am all ears.
I made inquiries. The Wetherington circle includes Lord Fallow, who was a particular friend of your uncle's, Lady Phoebe Ramsdale, whose feelings about your return to London are plain and far from favourable, and old Sir Dennis Carroll, who will ask you about Thornton Hall within 4 minutes of being introduced and consider your answer a complete character assessment.
The rain made a sound like applause against the roof.
Let us begin with Lord Fallow. He will want to talk about your uncle. He is not malicious. He genuinely grieved for him. Be warm. Don't be brief.
I can be warm.
You can be pleasant. They are not the same thing.
She looked at him levelly.
Warm means the other person understands that you feel something, and not simply that you are well bred. It is rarer than it should be, and more effective than most people realize.
A pause.
Warm means you remember something specific about your uncle that Lord Fallow would also have known. Think of something before Wednesday.
Philip was quiet for a moment.
We were not close. He had views about my choices that he expressed at some length, and I was not always receptive to them. But he kept a garden. Roses, mostly. He said the discipline of tending them made him the man he was.
Constance looked at him.
That is the right sort of thing.
And Lady Ramsdale?
And Lady Ramsdale?
Something crossed his face, too quickly to name. Before Constance could answer, Mrs. Dunmore looked up from her corner.
Lady Ramsdale told Mrs. Ashworth last Tuesday that she did not expect Lord Thornton to do any better by Miss Fairfax than he had done the first time. I thought you should know.
Philip looked at Constance, who looked at Mrs. Dunmore, who had more to say.
She has been out for several seasons and refused more than one offer. There are those who say she has been waiting for Lord Thornton to return. Whether that is true or simply gossip, I cannot say. But it explains the comment.
Constance considered this.
She will assess me. She will do it thoroughly, and she will do it with considerable style. I would like you to stay close.
Philip gave her a mock salute and a smile.
Have no fear, my lady. I shall be your shadow the entire evening.
The point is,
She stopped, rephrased.
I wish that we present a credible picture.
I understand.
A pause.
And how do you want me to behave, exactly?
As though I am your choice,
Constance said, more crisply than she intended.
and not an easy option.
Something in the carriage shifted. She had not meant to say it quite that way. The rain was very loud against the roof. Mrs. Dunmore, in her corner, appeared to find something of great interest in the passing street. Finally, Philip said, after a moment,
I will do my best to make it plain that you were always my first choice.
a silence. The park passed grey and empty beyond the window. Aware of Mrs. Dunmore's presence, Constance fought back the sudden urge to ask him for an explanation of what had occurred 3 years past. The need to know the truth nearly overwhelmed her. She sat very still for a moment, composing herself, before returning to the subject of the dinner.
Sir Dennis Carroll.
She continued, and she heard the slight shift in his breathing as he followed her back to safer ground.
He will ask about Thornton Hall, the tenant farms, or some such thing. Perhaps the stables? I have no idea what, precisely.
I know a great deal about the Northfield. My uncle wrote me a 7-page letter about it.
Did he?
3 pages of drainage, 2 pages of philosophy, 2 pages of hints about marriage that I found at the time excessive.
Constance looked at him, and he at her.
And now?
She said, her eyes naming the question she dared not speak aloud. His expression did something careful and deliberate that she recognized as restraint, the visible effort of a man choosing not to say the full thing in spite of a good opening.
Now I think I understand the philosophy section better.
So, Nothing about the marriage hints, she thought. The carriage moved through the rain, and the park was grey and very wet. The Wetherington dinner was, on the whole, a success. Lord Fallow embraced Philip with the uncomplicated warmth of a man who had genuinely loved his uncle, and Philip was, she could see it, warm in return, genuinely so, not performing. He mentioned the roses in the garden at Thornton Hall, and saw Lord Fallow's eyes brighten. They spoke for nearly 20 minutes, and Constance, seated 3 chairs away, watched it and felt something that was uncomfortably close to pride. Sir Dennis Carroll asked about the North Field within 5 minutes of being introduced. Philip spoke about the drainage with the quiet authority of a man who had read his uncle's 7-page letter and retained the most important part of its contents. Sir Dennis asked a follow-up question, which Philip answered competently. Sir Dennis nodded once, definitively. Philip had passed. Lady Ramsdale sat across the table, beautiful and composed. During the soup course, she addressed Philip directly.
Lord Thornton.
Her smile was perfectly composed.
London has missed you. It is gratifying to see you so settled.
The word landed with the precision of someone who had chosen it carefully. Constance kept her expression perfectly blank.
Thank you for your best wishes, Lady Ramsdale,
Philip said lightly. Constance met Lady Ramsdale's assessing gaze pleasantly, then turned to the gentleman on her right and asked him something about his estate in Hampshire, and let Lady Ramsdale watch her be entirely untroubled. Later, from across the table, Philip caught her eye during the fish course. He was not smiling. He looked, she thought, like a man trying to communicate something with his face and having to do it within the constraints of a formal dinner table. She looked back with the small, private expression that couples use for exactly this kind of moment, the one that said, "I see you, and we will discuss it later." And he looked back in kind, and the relief in his face surprised her. In the carriage afterward, she settled into her seat beside her maid and gave a sigh of relief.
I am pronouncing this evening a complete success.
He raised an eyebrow.
Are you certain?
Indeed. You even conquered Sir Dennis. It was plain to see because he spoke to you for a full minute after dinner, which is very long for him.
High praise.
She looked at him across the dark carriage.
Yes, it is.
He said nothing, but the expression on his face in the lamplight, unguarded briefly, told her that her words had reached him, and she looked away before it could do anything to her equilibrium. Philip walked her to the front door. He paused on the step and surprised her by taking her hands in his and looking intently into her face.
I chose poorly 3 years ago. I know that is inadequate. There were things I should have told you and did not, and I had neither the courage to say them nor to stay.
He looked as if he would say more. The moment passed. She looked at him for a moment in the lamplight.
I'm glad that you said that.
He bowed. The door closed. Charlotte was waiting inside for her, having stayed awake on the questionable grounds that she had been reading and had simply not noticed the time. She wanted to know everything. Constance gave her a precise account of some of the evening, omitted other parts entirely, and went to bed. She lay awake a long while with a question she had not asked, why he had gone, and what it was he could not yet bring himself to say. Chapter 6. The Third Term. The Pemberton country estate lay in Berkshire, and Lady Pemberton's habit of opening it each June for a week of archery, amateur theatricals, and excessive shrubbery had become a fixture of the season that no one could quite remember choosing, but everyone attended. This was Constance's 4th year. She liked the library, the views from the East Terrace, and the fact that the Pembertons' cook made a lemon syllabub that constituted her primary reason for leaving London. She had not anticipated that Philip would also receive an invitation. And yet, here they were, 2 days into their stay, navigating a house full of people who watched them with varying degrees of discretion. And doing it, she thought, rather well. Philip was charming at dinner in the way that looked effortless until you had spent enough time near him to notice the moments when the effort showed, and she was composed in the way she always was. And between them, they had constructed, in front of 30 well-connected witnesses, a very convincing appearance of 2 people who had come to an understanding. The difficulty was that it no longer felt entirely like one. She noticed small things. The way he angled himself toward her in a crowded room without appearing to do it deliberately. That he remembered that she disliked being interrupted mid-sentence, and waited, actually waited, visibly suppressing the impulse, before speaking. How she found herself, in the middle of a conversation, leaving a gap where his reply might go. These were not terms. These were not arrangements. These were something else, and she had been trying, with moderate success, not to look at them directly. Lady Ramsdale had arrived the first evening. Constance had known she would be there. Lady Ramsdale was invited everywhere. She and Philip had a history that everyone in London knew, and no one discussed in front of Constance, which told her a great deal about how it was regarded. Auburn-haired and beautifully composed, Lady Ramsdale watched Philip with the particular attention of a woman who considers something hers by prior claim. She watched Constance too, not with hostility, but with the measuring look of a woman taking stock of an obstacle and deciding how much effort it merits. Constance had met that look steadily and dressed accordingly, with rather more care than usual. That was the state of things when the weather, which had been cooperating admirably since their arrival, abruptly changed its mind. The lawns emptied, and half the party retreated to the drawing-room for cards. Constance, who had been on a solitary walk along the south garden and misjudged the timing badly, arrived at the stable-yard gate soaked to the ankle and in search of shelter. The stables were long and warm, smelling of horse and leather and hay, the way all stables do, without apology for any of it. Constance stepped inside and drew the door shut behind her. Philip was already there. He turned when she came in, took in her general dampness and said,
There's a tack trunk.
It was, she supposed, the best she could expect on short notice.
How fortunate for me.
She crossed to it and sat. He settled on a hay bale at the other end. Above them, the rain hammered the stable roof, loud and relentless, entirely without romance. The yard outside had gone to mud. They were not going anywhere.
None of the terms account for rainstorms.
Then they are ambiguous.
I shall add an amendment.
You are their authoress. I defer to your interpretation.
She wrung out the hem of her walking dress, with the pragmatism of someone who had accepted that dignity and weather are not always compatible, and sat back. A horse shifted in a nearby stall. The rain did not let up. She was aware, in the specific way she had become increasingly aware of things over the past 2 days, that the hay bale and the tack trunk were not far apart. In the long, warm quiet of the stable, with the rain coming down outside as if it intended to continue indefinitely, the distance between them felt considerably smaller than it had since their arrival.
What were you doing out here?
Checking on Nero. He doesn't like thunder. I didn't anticipate the rain lasting.
He glanced toward the stable door.
It had other plans.
I saw you speaking with Lady Ramsdale on the terrace this morning.
Philip was quiet for a moment.
She asked whether things were settled between us.
What did you say?
But they were progressing as one might hope.
That is not an answer.
It was meant to be a redirection.
A redirection.
She looked at him steadily.
She asked if we were settled. The answer is yes or no. You chose neither.
He looked at her fully.
I am well aware of the second term. Lady Ramsdale has no hold over me.
She was smiling.
She generally does. I have known Phoebe Ramsdale for 6 years. She does not smile at things that satisfy her. A smile for her is a form of patience.
He said it evenly. Too evenly, perhaps. Constance looked at him for a moment. There was something in his face she did not have the measure of, and tucked it away, unexamined, for later. Constance was quiet. The words of the second term came back to her.
You will not pursue or be seen to favour any other woman.
She thought about the way Lady Ramsdale had positioned herself at the far end of the drawing room after dinner, not close enough to intrude, close enough to observe them. The way she had of watching Philip as though she were simply waiting for the right moment to reclaim what she considered hers.
Are you worried?
I am paying attention.
She looked at her hands.
There is something she wants to expose. I don't know yet if it's the arrangement specifically, or simply the fact that that you chose.
She stopped.
That I chose you.
Some people will read it as a financial transaction, that you needed a bride, and I was simply the path of least resistance.
Let them think so.
He turned to face her.
Does it matter, Constance, what people think the reason is? You know your own terms. I know mine.
He had used her given name. She noted it the way one notes a door left open in a house where doors are always kept closed.
Your terms,
She said carefully.
which are the inheritance.
A pause.
Yes. That is why I came to your door. It is not why I stayed.
She held very still. Then, because she needed something to do with her hands, she crossed to Nero's stall and rested her fingers on the door. The horse turned his head toward her. She gently ran her fingers over the white blaze that ran down his face, and he pressed his muzzle gently into her palm. After a moment, she heard Philip cross the stable and come to stand beside her. He made no attempt to pretend it was about the horse. This was the moment, she understood, where she could redirect, where she could say something that returned them to the clean, clear landscape of their arrangement, where terms were terms and feelings were not on the table. She had done it before. She was skilled at it. She could produce a sentence right now, precise and cool and perfectly constructed, that would move them on.
I find that I don't entirely know what to do with you.
She said very quietly, still focusing her attention on Nero.
That may be the most honest thing you've said to me.
I say honest things constantly.
You say exactly what you intend to say. That was not what you intended to say.
He lifted his hand, not quite toward her face, but close enough that she knew where it was going.
Don't.
The word came out softer than she intended.
Don't what?
She exhaled.
We are stranded in a stable in a rainstorm, and neither of us has anywhere sensible to go. I need to think clearly about Lady Ramsdale, and I cannot do that if you are...
If I am what?
She stepped back. The rain had not lessened. She was going to walk back through it anyway.
You are saying things I am not yet ready to hear, and I need a moment before I know what to do with them.
She pushed open the stable door, and the rain hit her at once, cold and thorough, entirely indifferent. She walked back across the yard with her head down and her heart doing something she did not have a word for. Behind her she heard the stable door bang open again. She did not turn around. She went directly to her room, which connected to Charlotte's by way of a single door that Charlotte had found no compelling reason to keep closed. She had been inside perhaps 2 minutes when she heard voices in the corridor, Philip's, and then Charlotte's, bright and perfectly innocent. A pause, then footsteps moving away. The door opened. Charlotte was taken aback when she saw the rather bedraggled state of Constance, still dripping water onto the carpet, but quickly recovered.
What abominable weather,
She said innocently as she handed Constance a towel.
Don't.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Charlotte.
She took the towel. Charlotte sat down beside her.
You were gone a very long time.
The rain was very persistent.
Philip is looking for you.
Constance did not respond to this.
He looked...
Charlotte said, choosing her words with the care of someone who is trying very hard to be tactful.
as though something had happened.
We sheltered from a rainstorm.
I see.
A pause.
His cravat was disordered, and he appeared to be in a state of agitation.
Charlotte.
I am simply observing.
Charlotte looked at her with those bright, unreserved eyes that had never quite learned to conceal what they saw.
Go and dress for dinner. And say nothing to anyone. Nothing, Charlotte. I mean it.
Charlotte opened her mouth.
Whatever you think you observed, I am not ready for it to be a thing that is discussed.
Constance said more quietly. A silence. Then Charlotte, to her considerable credit, nodded once, pressed Constance's hand briefly, and went to her room, closing the door behind her. Constance sat down on the edge of the bed and stared out at the rainy landscape for rather longer than she would have liked. His words kept running through her mind.
That is why I came to your door. It is not why I stayed.
She had rebuilt herself after the last time into someone who did not do foolish things, who did not let feeling outrun judgment, who understood the difference between what a man said and what a man did, and who had 3 years of evidence on which to form a view about Philip Thornton. She had formed it. She was now considerably less certain of it. She stood, rang for her maid, ordered a hot bath, and put herself back together, as she always did, with the efficiency of long practice. She would think about the stables later, when she had somewhere private to do it properly. Chapter 7. The letter. The letter arrived with the morning post, sealed with plain wax and no identifying mark. Constance opened it. It was brief and carefully worded. A friend, who cannot in good conscience remain silent, believes you are owed a warning. Lord Thornton's conduct prior to his departure from England was not such as a woman in your position would wish to overlook. A prudent woman asks questions before it is too late to ask them. She read it twice. Then she set it down, folded her hands, and spent several minutes thinking with the focused attention she usually reserved for the most demanding situations, and arrived at a conclusion. This was not a threat. A genuine threat named terms and made demands. This was a warning, designed to unsettle, perhaps to frighten her into a quiet retreat before anything could be proved or said aloud. The sender wanted her gone, not exposed, not confronted, simply gone. The correct response was to remain entirely unchanged. She wrote a note to Arabella Weston.
Come when you are able.
Arabella arrived before noon, settled herself across from Constance, and read the letter without comment.
Phoebe Ramsdale.
She said when she had finished.
In all likelihood.
You cannot prove it.
I don't need to prove it.
Constance took the letter back.
She wants me to walk away, quietly, of my own accord, and leave the field to her.
She has chosen an elegant method.
An elegant and cowardly one. She says nothing specific, which tells me she cannot say it specifically or will not.
Constance set the letter in the small drawer of her writing desk and turned the key.
She is counting on me to be frightened enough to withdraw of my own accord.
Arabella looked at her with the steady, affectionate attention that had always made Constance feel both valued and thoroughly seen.
And will you?
No.
She smoothed her gloves.
I am going to Lady Fortescue's card party this evening. Lady Ramsdale will be there. I intend to be entirely pleasant.
A silence. Arabella was one of the few people of Constance's acquaintance who knew when argument was useful and when it was not. She sat with this for a moment before saying,
You are going alone.
Philip is not invited to this sort of occasion. Lady Fortescue's card parties are not that kind of evening.
Constance folded her hands.
Besides, I would rather meet her on ground where I have the advantage.
What advantage does a card party give you?
I am better at cards than she is, and I do not require Lord Thornton's presence to be impressive in a drawing room.
Something in Arabella's expression that was not quite a smile came and went.
Send a note to me when you return.
I shall.
Lady Fortescue's card parties were not the grandest entertainments of the season, but they were reliable and well assembled, the kind of gathering where connections were maintained, alliances quietly confirmed, and information of all varieties exchanged behind the agreeable cover of whist. Constance arrived in good time, accepted a glass of ratafia she had no intention of drinking, and settled into the room with the unhurried composure of a woman who has come to enjoy herself and has every reason to. Lady Ramsdale arrived some 20 minutes later. She was exquisitely turned out in ice blue, chosen to set off her eyes, and her auburn hair dressed with the kind of careful simplicity that required a great deal of effort to achieve. She entered as she always did, surveyed the assembled company with a single controlled sweep, and found Constance. Their eyes met for just a moment. Constance smiled, warmly, pleasantly, without a trace of anything else, and turned to admire, with apparent sincerity, a mediocre portrait above Lady Fortescue's mantelpiece. They were inevitably drawn together over the course of the evening. That was the geometry of a room this size, with this particular composition of people. Lady Ramsdale arrived at Constance's elbow during the second hand of cards, with the ease of a woman for whom arrivals are never accidental.
Miss Fairfax, I had hoped to find you here this evening.
Lady Ramsdale,
Constance collected her cards without hurry.
you are looking very well.
As are you. I confess Lord Thornton's courtship quite agrees with you. You have a bloom about you this season.
The words were perfectly pleasant. The intention behind them was not.
How kind of you to notice. Are you playing this hand? I believe it is your lead.
Lady Ramsdale played her card. The game continued. Between hands she tried once more, with the persistence of a woman who has come for something and is disinclined to leave without it.
I enjoyed the Pembertons' party,
She said pleasantly.
though the rain was a great inconvenience. You and Lord Thornton were caught out in it, I believe.
Indeed.
Constance sorted her hand.
The rain caught us entirely off guard. Fortunately, Lord Thornton found a good place to shelter.
Quite. And Lord Thornton was good company, I imagine.
Lord Thornton is always good company.
Constance said pleasantly and played her trump card and won the trick. This continued, in one form or another, for the better part of the evening, Lady Ramsdale making her careful approaches, Constance receiving them with impeccable warmth and the particular composure of a woman who has nothing whatsoever to conceal. She gave her nothing, not a hesitation, not a guarded answer, not a single moment's unease that could be taken away and made use of. By the time the card tables gave way to supper, there was a quality to Lady Ramsdale's composure that Constance recognised, the particular tautness of a woman who had come looking for something and was being required to revise her expectations downward. She departed before supper was finished, with a smile that had acquired a certain thinness at the edges. Constance stayed, won the next set of cards with some decisiveness, and went home in excellent spirits. Philip called the following morning, as he did on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and was shown into the drawing-room where Constance was attending to correspondence. She put down her pen and told him all of it: the letter, Arabella's visit, and then the card party. Lady Ramsdale's careful approaches over the course of an evening, her precise interest in the Pembertons' reign, her graceful departure before supper with nothing to show for it.
She was watching me for a reaction.
Constance said.
I believe it was she that sent the letter.
At the end of the tale, he was very still. His expression held something she had not seen in him before, a shock he was not quite quick enough to conceal, and beneath it, an anger that was quiet and, she thought, considerable.
You should not have had to manage that alone.
I managed it very competently.
That is not the point.
She looked at him.
What is the point?
He was quiet for a moment.
The point is that Phoebe Ramsdale is doing this because of me, because of what passed between us before I left. That places the difficulty at my door, and I dislike being peripheral to the managing of a problem I caused.
Something settled in the room, quiet and significant as the moment before a clock strikes.
What did pass between you?
She said it in the careful, even voice she used for things that cost her something to say. She had come close to asking it in the carriage returning from the Wetherington dinner, and again in the stables at Pemberton, and each time had stepped back from it. She was not stepping back now. Philip looked at her for a long moment. Then he began precisely at the beginning.
My uncle was my guardian from the age of 9. As such, he considered himself to have considerable authority over my future. 3 years ago, when he understood that my intentions toward you were serious, he made his opposition plain.
She had suspected as much. It was different somehow to hear it said.
I told myself I required more time,
He looked down.
that the situation would resolve itself, that I would find a means of satisfying my uncle without
Here he hesitated.
doing what he asked. The situation did not resolve itself. I resolved nothing. I left instead.
She held his gaze.
Tell me about Lady Ramsdale.
Something shifted in his expression. Not quite closing, but not quite open. He was quiet for a moment longer than he ought to have been.
You have your arrangement, Constance. The terms are precisely as you wrote them. What passed between Lady Ramsdale and myself is not covered by any of them, and I am not required to account for it.
I did not ask you in regards to the terms. I asked you as someone who would like to understand what happened.
You are very capable of managing your own affairs. You have just demonstrated as much.
There was an edge beneath the words that she did not miss.
You need only invoke the 5th term, £10,000. I believe that covers everything.
The silence that followed was of a different quality than the ones that had come before. She did not flinch. She had decided very early in life never to let the people who wounded her know that they had done it. She looked at him, at the set of his jaw, the careful stillness of a man who had said something he could not quite unsay, and she said nothing at all. The door closed behind him, not quietly this time. Constance sat for a long time after, hands folded in her lap, the drawing room very quiet. She was not certain at first why her vision had blurred. She blinked and understood, and sat with that understanding for several minutes without moving. The 5th term had been her idea, every word of it, and he hated her for it. Philip did not go home directly. He told his coachman to drive, without a destination, and sat in the dark interior of the carriage and thought about what he had done. It had been deliberate. That was the part he could not excuse. Or rather, could not excuse cleanly, because he had told himself it was not cruelty, but sense. If Constance invoked the 5th term, she would no longer be in danger from Phoebe Ramsdale. The logic had seemed sound at the time. She had not flinched. That was the worst of it. She had looked at him with those clear, steady eyes and said nothing at all, and he had felt the silence land like a judgment more precise than anything she might have said. He sat with the logic of it and found it considerably less sound than it had seemed in the moment. He had hurt her to protect her, or he had hurt her because she was pressing too close to something he was not ready to give. He could not, with any honesty, say which of those was true. The carriage moved through the streets. He sat in it for a long time and did not arrive at any useful conclusion. Chapter 8. The Withdrawal. Constance sat without moving for a long time. The drawing room was very quiet. The afternoon had begun to grey at the windows. At some point a footman came in to tend the fire and went away again without speaking, which she appreciated. The 5th term had been her idea, every word of it. She had written it because she had needed to know she could leave, not because she had intended to use it, not as a plan, but as a door she might keep unlocked. The kind of precaution a sensible woman takes when she is not certain she trusts her own heart, let alone the man she is making an arrangement with. She had not expected him to very nearly ask her to use it. She picked up her pen at 5:30 and wrote to him. It said, what the fifth term required, that she was invoking her right to conclude the arrangement, that she thanked him for his conduct throughout the season, that she wished him well. It was correct in every particular. She sealed it and addressed it and rang for the footman. The letter was sent. The house was quiet after that, in the specific way of something that has shifted rather than something that is missing. Tuesdays arrived and passed without callers. Thursdays were similarly unremarkable. She attended Lady Moorfield's evening concert and found it tedious. She took Charlotte to the linen draper on a Wednesday and was very definite about what materials would best suit. She received a note from Mrs. Dunmore containing 3 pieces of social intelligence and 1 pointed inquiry about Lord Thornton, which she answered in full on every point but the last. She was, she told herself, quite all right. She had not told her father. If she had, he would have gone to the solicitor before the ink was dry on her letter, and she was not yet ready for that. Charlotte did not know either, but she had been watching Constance with the particular attention of someone who has noticed a great deal and is choosing, for once, to wait. Then one evening she said,
He was at the Old Crofts Assembly.
Constance did not look up from her embroidery.
Was he?
He came with Colonel Ashby. He stayed for an hour.
A pause.
He did not look well.
Assemblies are tiring.
Constance,
Charlotte set down her own work.
Philip Thornton has not called in a fortnight. You have not mentioned him once.
There is nothing to mention.
That is precisely what concerns me.
The embroidery sat in Constance's lap. Outside, a cart passed on the street.
He did not look
Charlotte said carefully.
like a man who had obtained what he wanted.
I am not certain what he wanted.
And what about what you wanted?
Charlotte met her eyes. Constance looked down at the embroidery. She had been working the same small section for the better part of a week and had not, she now noticed, made any discernible progress. She set it aside.
When he called last,
She said carefully.
he said something. I drew a conclusion from it. I acted on that conclusion.
She paused.
I am not entirely certain the conclusion was correct.
Charlotte waited.
Something changed in him when I asked about Lady Ramsdale. Something closed. And then he said what he said. I took it to mean one thing. I may have been wrong.
What did you take it to mean?
The word she had been avoiding for a fortnight sat somewhere beneath her sternum with the weight of something carefully sidestepped.
That he had reconsidered.
She said at last.
All of it.
Charlotte was quiet for a moment.
And do you believe that?
Constance looked at the window. Somewhere on the street a vendor called, and London continued with complete indifference to the question.
I believed it at the time.
She had been wrong before. She was not in the habit of being wrong, and she did not enjoy it, but she was honest enough to know she was capable of it. 3 years ago she had been wrong about a great many things. She had rebuilt on the understanding that she would not be wrong in that particular way again, that she would examine and not assume and look for the cracks before she trusted the structure. She had not, she thought, examined this as carefully as she might have. He had been the one to name the 5th term. That was true. But she had taken that fact and placed it on top of the simplest available conclusion. He had second thoughts about his choice of her as a wife and used her own escape clause to say so. And she had not looked any further. She had been hurt. She had acted accordingly. She was not certain she had been wrong, but she was no longer certain she had been right. Charlotte yawned.
I'm going to bed. I suggest you do the same. Perhaps things will seem clearer in the morning.
The next day, her father appeared in the doorway of the morning room after breakfast and asked, with the slightly formal air he adopted when he had been working up to something, whether she would care to walk with him. She rose and put her hand on his arm. They walked in the square, which was quiet at this hour, a nursemaid with a perambulator on the far side. a pair of sparrows conducting urgent business near the elm. Sir Edmund walked with his hands behind his back in the manner he had always walked, upright and unhurried, and said nothing for some time, which she had learned long ago meant he was finding the words.
Thornton has not been about,
He said at last.
No.
The Tuesday calls have stopped, and the Thursday ones.
Yes.
He was quiet for another few steps.
Has something happened?
Constance watched the sparrows.
The arrangement has run its course.
This was not, she could tell, a satisfactory explanation to him. But he was a man who had long since learned that pressing Constance produced less information, not more. They completed a circuit of the square before he spoke again.
He seemed a decent sort this time.
This time. 2 words, said without particular emphasis, carrying everything.
Yes, he did.
Shall I set up a meeting with the solicitors?
Not yet.
Her father nodded, as though this settled something for him, though she could not have said what. He did not ask whether she was all right. He was not always good at those questions, and she was not always good at the answers, and they had reached, over the years, a quiet understanding about this. Instead, he said,
I thought we might have the Dunmores to dinner next week.
and she said that would be very pleasant, and they finished their walk in the mild morning air, and he went into his study, and she stood for a moment outside alone before following him inside. She had not wanted her father to go to the solicitors. She was not ready for that. She was not, she was beginning to understand, ready for a great many things to be final. She did not want his £10,000. The money had made sense when she had written the 5th term. It made considerably less sense now. A package arrived on Monday from a confectioner in Covent Garden. Marron Glacé, candied chestnuts ordered 3 weeks ago from a shop that sourced them directly from France. Philip's birthday was the 15th of June. She had heard him mention them once, in the carriage returning from somewhere, in the offhand way of a man describing something he clearly enjoyed and did not expect to have again. She had noted it and said nothing, and visited the confectioner's shop the following morning. She set the package on the corner of her writing desk. She did not send it. She did not throw it away. A length of fine white linen arrived that same week from the draper on Oxford Street, the first piece of a trousseau she had, in a moment of private optimism she had not examined too closely, begun to assemble, the household linens and small personal things a bride brought into her marriage. She had given the monogram as C.T. The draper had done beautiful work. She put it away in the bottom drawer of her wardrobe and did not think about it. That night in bed, her mind kept returning to the same question. Why would Philip push her toward the 5th term simply to avoid answering a question about Lady Ramsdale? The proportion was wrong. She had been certain when she sent the letter that she understood what had happened. She was considerably less certain now. Charlotte had said he did not look like a happy man, and she trusted Charlotte the way she trusted her own hands. Lady Pendleton's garden party was Saturday. She had not replied to the invitation. She rose, lit a candle, crossed to the writing desk, and picked up her pen. Chapter 9. Marron Glacé. Constance wrote 2 letters. The first was to Lady Pendleton, accepting her invitation to the garden party with her compliments and Charlotte's. She began the second 3 times. Dear Lord Thornton, dear Philip, my lord. She got as far as I have been thinking about what you said on the 3rd attempt, and then sat looking at it until she understood that not knowing what came next was the problem itself. She folded the page and placed it in the back of the drawer, beneath the linen. Then she snuffed the candle and returned to bed. She did not sleep well. Saturday came with high pale cloud and a wind that promised nothing and kept its word. Good garden party weather, Charlotte announced at breakfast, with the authority of someone who considered this an official meteorological distinction.
You are going,
Charlotte said. It was not quite a question.
I said I was going.
You said you might.
Charlotte buttered her toast with the focused attention she reserved for things she was pretending not to care about.
I am merely noting that might and am going are not the same.
I am going. Finish your toast.
Lady Pendleton's garden on a fine afternoon was everything a garden party in the 3rd week of June should be. White linens on long tables, roses coming into their best flush, the cheerful noise of 24 conversations conducted at the precise volume required to be overheard. Constance had attended this party 3 years running and knew its geography the way she knew her own drawing room. The stone balustrade where the Mercer girls always congregated, the elm at the far end of the lawn where Mr. Hartley smoked when he thought no one could see him, the table nearest the house where the lemonade was reliably good and the sandwiches were reliably not. She had been there 20 minutes when she saw Philip. He was standing with Lord Pendleton near the rose border, looking at something his host was pointing to with great enthusiasm, and he had his hands clasped behind his back the way he did when he was attending politely to something that did not interest him. She noticed that he looked very handsome and wished that she hadn't. Charlotte, beside her, made a sound that was not quite a word. Constance made a valiant attempt to maintain her composure. Charlotte moved serenely toward the nearest table, leaving her standing at the edge of the lawn with no particular reason to be standing there. She went to speak to Mrs. Holloway and stayed rather longer than either of them probably wanted. And when she looked up again, Philip had moved from the rose border to the balustrade, where he was being talked at by Lady Mercer with every appearance of willing engagement. He was good at that. She had always known it, and had simply, in recent months, allowed herself to forget that the charm he showed in public and the ease she had come to know in private were two entirely different things. He looked up. She did not look away quickly enough. He said something briefly to Lady Mercer, who turned to follow his gaze, saw Constance, and smiled in the particular way that meant she would be telling 3 people about this before tea. Constance kept her expression entirely pleasant and turned back to Mrs. Holloway, who was saying something about her niece's prospects in Derbyshire.
I beg your pardon,
Said a voice beside her a few minutes later.
Mrs. Holloway, might I steal Miss Fairfax for a moment?
Mrs. Holloway smiled and said that he might. Constance's heart skipped a beat. They walked. There was a path along the far side of the garden, between the box hedge and the kitchen wall, less observed than the main lawn, though hardly secluded. Nothing at Lady Pendleton's was precisely private. She took the path. She was aware, in the way one becomes aware of a fact one has been successfully avoiding, that she had spent the better part of the week hoping he would be here. She had not admitted this to Charlotte. She had not quite admitted it to herself. She was admitting it now, walking beside him in the particular silence of 2 people who have a great deal to say and have not yet found the order in which to say it.
I had not taken you for an enthusiast of garden parties.
Constance remarked.
They are not, usually, to my taste. However, your sister informed me that you were planning to attend, which changed my view on this one.
Did she?
Constance made a private note to thank Charlotte later for her very welcome interference.
She did.
A pause.
You look very well.
She said nothing. They walked for a while in silence.
Your father has not been to the solicitor's.
She stopped walking.
How do you know that?
I would have heard something by now.
He stopped beside her.
I am not asking why. I only wanted you to know that I know.
The box hedge gave off its sharp green scent in the afternoon sun. Someone on the main lawn laughed at something. Charlotte, she thought. She recognized the pitch of it. She had no idea what to say. She had words enough somewhere, but none of them were in the right order.
I have a gift for your birthday,
she said, and it came out nothing like she had planned.
I am sorry that I did not send it. I was writing a letter to go with it, but it was all wrong and...
Tears came without warning. She stopped. He went very still. Philip was looking at her in a way she had not let herself see before. She saw it now.
Constance.
You did not answer my question about Lady Ramsdale. You would have preferred me to send you the 5th term than answer me. Why?
He was quiet a moment.
Because it is not a simple thing to tell someone, and I was certain what you would think of me at the end of it.
Tell me now,
she said. And then, more quietly,
please.
the laugh from the main lawn again, Charlotte, from the sound of it, at something involving Lady Mercer and a hat. The sun had come out and was drawing long, warm lines across the top of the box hedge.
3 years ago, Lady Ramsdale went to my uncle. She made a claim about the nature of what had passed between us, a claim that went considerably beyond what was true.
Constance went very still.
She told him I had gotten her with child.
His voice was entirely even. She understood from that evenness what it was costing him.
He believed it, or he found it useful to believe it. She has a very great dowry. The pressure that followed, the letters, the conversations, the clear expectation of what I was to do, you may imagine.
Philip.
It was a lie.
He turned to face her fully.
There had been a flirtation. I will not pretend otherwise, but nothing of what she claimed, and it had ended before I ever came to know you properly.
A pause.
I had no way to disprove it without making it public, and the moment it was public, it was damaging, to her, to me, and to anyone connected to me.
He looked at her.
To you. After you sent me the letter with the 5th term, I went to see her. I had nothing left to lose by asking. There was no child. There never was. She admitted it readily enough. She had made the claim to make another man jealous. I was convenient.
He paused.
And as for the anonymous letter,
he stopped briefly.
She said that as I seemed to be forming an attachment, she thought it best to discourage it. So she sent the letter.
A pause.
She is not the sort of woman I would ever offer for. She knows that. I suspect that is rather the point.
Constance said nothing. For 3 years, she had kept a very tidy version of what had happened, what he had chosen, and why, and what it said about him. It had required him to be a man who had weighed her against his own interests and found her wanting. It had been a painful story. It had also been a coherent one, and she had lived inside it long enough that it had simply become the truth. What he had just described was not that man. It was a man who had been cornered, who had chosen silence over something worse, and who had spent 3 years paying for it. She did not know what to do with that. She was not sure she had a category for it.
I knew that if I could induce you to invoke the 5th term, and our arrangement ended, Lady Ramsdale would have no further reason to trouble you. But I am too selfish to live without you.
Constance put her hand to her mouth.
I came back to London this spring because I needed a solution to an inheritance problem, and I asked you to marry me because I knew I owed it to you.
His voice was not quite steady.
What I did not admit to myself was that it was not only that. I stopped believing it was only a debt somewhere around the 2nd week of May.
He paused.
The truth is that I never stopped caring for you, Constance.
He dropped to one knee on the gravel path and took her hands in his.
Constance, will you marry me?
Lord Thornton, you had better stand up before the entire garden party sees you.
A pause, and then more quietly.
But yes, I will.
The kitchen wall offered no commentary, and the sun continued in its unhurried work. They strolled along the path, both pleasantly occupied with their own thoughts.
May I still have my birthday gift?
He asked, with something in his voice that was not quite teasing.
I suppose you may. It has been taking up rather a great deal of room on my writing desk.
She glanced at him.
What do you imagine it is?
I am afraid that you will have to give me a hint.
Something that you liked very much in France and are missing a great deal.
Understanding crossed his face.
Marron glacé.
Well guessed,
she said with a smile.
However did you manage it?
They were imported, from France as it happens. I confess I have been rather curious about them myself. The idea of a candied chestnut is somewhat odd.
He considered this with great gravity.
I suppose you may have one?
There was very nearly a wink in his voice. She had spent days trying to write a letter to him and not finding the right words. She was glad, walking beside him in the afternoon sun, that she no longer needed them. Chapter 10. October. The carriage ride home from Lady Pendleton's was, Constance later reflected, the happiest journey she had made in recent memory. Charlotte sat across from her with the expression of someone exercising considerable self-restraint, which for Charlotte meant her hands were folded in her lap, and she was looking at the middle distance with great interest. She had managed this for approximately 4 minutes before they reached the end of the street, which was, by Charlotte's standards, remarkable. They were nearly to Grosvenor Square before she spoke.
You were gone for quite a long time.
We took a long path.
It is not a particularly long path, Lady Mercer noticed.
Of course she did.
Charlotte turned from the window. Her expression had shifted from self-restraint to something quieter and more careful.
Constance, are you going to tell me why you seem so very happy?
Constance looked at her sister, at the familiar blonde hair and the bright eyes, and the kind of attention that had always been Charlotte's particular gift. She found that she wished to share her happiness with her.
We are to be married,
she said, with a true smile that lit up her face from within. Charlotte gave a sudden laugh. Then they both laughed together, the tension of the past several weeks at last being over. Finally, they stopped and let the silence be companionable. She did not sleep well that night either, but for different reasons. The facts of it arranged themselves with merciless clarity. What Lady Ramsdale had invented, what Philip's uncle had made of it, what Philip had borne alone and why, the anonymous letter, the 5th term, which she had understood as rejection, and which had been, instead, the action of a man at the end of his resources who had chosen the worst possible way to protect her. She lay in the dark and turned it over until, somewhere around 3 in the morning, she reached a conclusion. Lady Ramsdale's hold had depended on Philip having something to hide. He did not, any longer, which meant it was not his burden to manage, it was hers. She rang for her maid at 7. Lady Ramsdale kept her waiting 30 minutes in the hall before she was shown up. Time enough to conclude that she had chosen, deliberately, to take her time. The sitting room, when she was finally admitted, was small and pale. Silk wallpaper printed with Chinese birds and blossoms, a lacquered cabinet against one wall, a pair of chairs with gilt sphinx head arms. Everything chosen to be noticed, everything arranged for effect. Lady Ramsdale herself was immaculately dressed, but there were shadows beneath her eyes that no amount of preparation had quite concealed. She had not, Constance suspected, slept particularly well either.
Miss Fairfax,
she said with the air of a woman who had expected this eventually and was not inclined to pretend otherwise.
What an unexpected pleasure.
Lady Ramsdale.
Constance sat. She had worn her pale yellow.
I will not take much of your time.
Lady Ramsdale sat opposite, ice-blue eyes entirely steady. She was, Constance had always thought, a woman one would be foolish to underestimate. She did not intend to do so now.
I know what you told Lord Thornton's uncle, and I know it was false. I also know that it was you who sent me the letter, warning me about Lord Thornton's past.
A pause. Something moved in Lady Ramsdale's expression, very briefly, and then was gone.
you have been busy.
Not especially. My fiancé told me everything.
Constance kept her voice pleasant.
I wanted you to know that he has, and that your letter will not produce the result you intended.
She paused.
Lord Thornton no longer has anything to protect me from, and therefore you no longer have any hold over him, which leaves you with rather less than you had before.
Lady Ramsdale was quiet. The gaudy room was very still. Outside the window a cart was making its slow way along the street, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the slow rumble of it passing.
"You are remarkably composed,"
she said at last.
"for a woman who has just learned what you have learned."
I am composed because I know it was a lie, and because I believe Lord Thornton over you, and because,
Constance added more quietly,
I think you understand that this conversation is the end of it.
it was not a threat. It was a plain statement of fact, and she thought Lady Ramsdale recognised the difference. There was something in her expression, not defeat exactly, but the particular look of a woman who had held her advantage for 3 years and understood now that it was gone. The silence stretched. Then Lady Ramsdale looked away.
"Good morning, Miss Fairfax."
Good morning.
Constance said, and rose and left. She did not allow herself to feel anything until she was in the carriage. Then she sat back against the cushion and closed her eyes and let out a long, slow breath, and noticed, with some surprise, that her hands were not entirely steady. She sat with that for a moment, the tremor in her fingers, the peculiar looseness behind her ribs, and understood that what she felt was not triumph. It was something quieter, relief perhaps, or the sensation of a weight set down after so long that she had forgotten it had a shape. She found she did not mind the feeling at all. Philip called that afternoon. She set down her book when he was shown in.
I went to see Lady Ramsdale this morning.
He went very still.
Constance,
I wanted to,
she said, before he could finish.
She has had that over us for 3 years. I did not see why she should have it for a 4th.
She looked at him.
It is done. She will not trouble us again.
He sat down across from her and was quiet for a moment.
I owe you an apology. More than one. For the way I left 3 years ago. For the 5th term letter. I told myself it was to protect you, but I chose the cruelest way of achieving it, and I am sorry for it.
It was a plain apology, unadorned, spoken without artifice. It was, she thought, the only kind she would have trusted.
You could not bring yourself to tell me the truth. And you thought if I ended our arrangement, I need never find out.
Yes, that is exactly it, but it is not an excuse.
No, but it is a reason, and I'm glad to have both.
She met his gaze and held it.
I accept your apology.
Something in him settled, visibly, and all at once.
There is also,
she said after a moment,
the matter of the terms themselves.
How so?
I have instructed my father to destroy the contract. It is no longer necessary.
Philip reached for her hands.
No, it is not.
The afternoon light came through the windows and lay in long pale bars across the carpet. From the hallway came the distinct sound of someone stifling a sneeze, which was almost certainly Charlotte eavesdropping. Constance rolled her eyes at Philip and they both laughed. She opened the door just as Charlotte rounded the corner and called out to her.
Charlotte! Please go to my room and fetch the parcel wrapped in brown paper on my writing desk. It will be worth your while.
Charlotte grinned and went.
I hope you don't mind sharing more of your gift, but it seems wasteful to have ordered them all the way from France and then not—
Constance.
His voice was not quite steady. He rose and crossed to her, took both her hands in his.
I have been wanting to say this since considerably before the 2nd week of April, if you want the truth.
I think that we have established I do want the truth.
Then here it is.
He looked at their joined hands, and then at her.
I love you. I loved you 3 years ago, and I have loved you in varying degrees of wretchedness ever since, and if you will let me, I intend to love you with rather more competence for the remainder of our lives.
That is quite a specific way to say it.
I am being precise.
You are?
She looked at him, at the face she had been trying not to love for 3 years.
I love you too. I have been considerably more annoyed about it than you have, but the conclusion is the same.
Philip laughed. Not the social laugh she had heard at 100 parties, but the real one, the unguarded one. She found she very much wanted to hear it again. She thought with some satisfaction that she would have a lifetime in which to do so. Charlotte had chanced upon their father on the way back with the Marron glacés, which meant poor Philip was obliged to share his rare confections rather more widely than he had perhaps intended. They proved extremely popular. Sir Edmund vowed to order more for himself. He had received the news from Constance that they had set a wedding date for October almost without comment, which made her think he had suspected this happy ending all along, and had simply been waiting for it to settle itself. The afternoon stretched pleasantly. Philip stayed longer than was strictly necessary, and nobody appeared to mind. Sir Edmund, having satisfied himself that Lord Thornton's intentions were honourable and his opinions on agricultural reform tolerably sensible, issued an invitation to dinner with the air of a man who considered the matter settled. Philip accepted with every appearance of gratitude. Charlotte, for her part, managed to be present in every room they occupied without ever quite appearing to follow them, which was a considerable feat of navigation. She also ate 3 of the Marron glacés and expressed no guilt whatsoever. It was, Constance thought, watching Philip argue amiably with her father over the port. Exactly the kind of evening she had not known she was hoping for. Nothing was resolved in any great dramatic fashion. No speeches were made. Her father shook Philip's hand at the door with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had waited 3 years for something to be done properly and was glad at last that it had been. She stood at the window and watched the carriage until it turned the corner. Then she went to bed and slept very well indeed. Epilogue. It is perhaps worth noting, for the benefit of those who have followed these events with interest, that the autumn of 1815 produced several outcomes of note beyond the merger of the Fairfax and Thornton houses. Mr. Pemberton, who had first been observed conversing with Charlotte at Lady Hartley's assembly with the focused attention of a young man who has found the most interesting person in the room and intends to make the most of it, had, by the time of the October wedding, developed a habit of calling in Grosvenor Square with great frequency and a variety of thin pretexts. Charlotte received these calls with the transparent delight of a young woman who has decided, after careful consideration, that she does not intend to be coy about something she wants. Their engagement was announced in November, to the satisfaction of Sir Edmund, the surprise of nobody, and the considerable delight of Mrs. Dunmore, who told several people that she had predicted this since the assembly and wondered only what had taken them so long. Lady Ramsdale removed herself to the country in September. This was understood by everyone who understood anything to be exactly what it was. She did not trouble anyone further. The Thorntons were settled at Thornton House by November. They had gone to Scotland for their wedding trip, following, as Philip observed with some amusement, the example set by Mr. and Mrs. Frederick Weston. Constance had taken stock of her new household with the efficient thoroughness of a woman who has been managing things for a long time and finds the larger canvas simply more interesting than the smaller one. Philip watched this process with what he later described privately as deep admiration and some personal caution. She had reordered the morning room, renegotiated the account with the coal merchant, and identified 3 inefficiencies in the household calendar, all within a fortnight.
I am not managing you,
she told him when he observed this.
I know. I am merely noting the pace.
It is an efficient pace.
It is a thoroughly Constance pace.
And she had looked at him and found she did not mind that at all. In December, 3 weeks before Christmas, Philip disappeared into the glass house at the far end of the garden for the better part of a morning. This was not unusual. He had developed, since their return from the wedding trip, a quiet interest in the hothouse that Constance attributed to the same orderly disposition that expressed itself elsewhere in dawn rides and meticulous account books. What was unusual was that he emerged carrying a small bunch of white tulips their stems pale green against the frost-grey morning, petals entirely perfect, as though December had simply not applied to them. He set them on her writing desk without comment. She looked at them for a long moment.
You forced them in the hothouse.
They take about 8 weeks. I started in September.
She understood then that he had begun growing them before the wedding.
They are very beautiful.
Yes, though not the loveliest thing in the room.
She took one tulip from the bunch and tucked it carefully into his buttonhole. He looked at her for a moment, the unmanaged look, the real one, and then went to his study. Mrs. Dunmore, who heard about the tulips from Charlotte, who had it from Sir Edmund, who had the story from Constance in a letter that mentioned them only in passing, wrote to her with the observation that Lord Thornton was more perceptive than anyone had given him credit for, which was, she added, entirely consistent with her own assessment of his character from the beginning, as she had noted to Constance on several occasions, and which she felt it only fair to acknowledge had proved correct. Constance replied that Mrs. Dunmore was, as usual, right about everything, and sealed the letter with the small smile of a happy woman. Outside, the December light came through the tall windows of Thornton House with the unhurried clarity of a morning with nothing to prove. The fire was lit, the post was sorted. Somewhere in the house, Philip was reading about drainage. Sir Edmund had ordered even more Marron glacés from France, and Charlotte's wedding plans had already grown considerably beyond what anyone had anticipated. Everything was, in other words, exactly as it should be. The end. And so Constance Fairfax has found her answer, not in the terms she set, but in the truth she was owed, and finally chose to believe. If this story stayed with you, another is waiting. Pen Rivals follows Miss Cassandra Fenwick, anonymous reviewer for The Lantern, London's sharpest literary magazine, who has just taken apart the fashionable verses of Mr. Christopher Blackwood, line by line, in print. He was everything she expected, charming, extravagant, and entirely too pleased with his peacock blue coat. She knew exactly who he was. He had no idea who she was. A country house party in Wiltshire is about to change that. 2 sharp minds, 1 secret, and a fortnight in which neither of them can afford to be honest. Tap the video on your screen to continue listening. I shall return soon with another romance, unless someone invokes the 5th term.